I'm a writer. I live in the States. I live in Nashville, Tennessee, to be exact. I'm going to start off just by reading a couple of poems from my forthcoming collection. It's called Negotiations. You can see if you see it. It'll be out from Tin House in October. And I was asked to focus on the topic of like love in the time of disaster. And actually, it's interesting. I wrote this book not thinking of it as a book of love poems. Even though when I first started writing poetry, I considered myself a love poet and I was deeply interested in writing about relationships. And relationships within families, romantic relationships, what have you. And I think I did not envision my first book to look like this. And I think if I'd known what it looked like, I would have not called it a book of love poems. But I think the more I read it and the more I think about these poems, I think they're very much about love. But they've also taught me that when you're writing about love, there's a great possibility that you might also be writing about race and violence and friendship and community. And I think that this book really works hard to tackle all of those subjects, hopefully in interesting ways. So I'm going to read a couple of poems from two sections. So um, there are a couple of like love relationships in this book. I think that's a really elastic term, but one of the relationships ends in an act of violence, and then the other one is just a very complicated friendship that I was just really trying to better understand. And so I started writing poems about it, and they turned into pieces that were really that I thought worked really well in this book. So I'm going to read a couple of poems from those sections, and then if then we can sort of talk a little bit about the poems. We can talk a little bit about the process of putting a book together, which I know has been one of the conversations you've had in these master classes. But yeah, let me read a couple of things and see where it takes us. So this first poem is called Scope. And I'll just warn you that these first few poems, I'll offer just a brief trigger warning that there are conversations about sexual violence. So, but this first poem is called Scope. This illness is turning me into a cannibal. I'm unraveling myself one fistula at a time and dreaming of what I can no longer consume. A scalding dribble of cheese roping my chin, meat still tinged with pulses of pink. I'm startled awake by the taste of my own blood sweetening my throat. Last week, I told a friend about our last time when you left the condom unopened on the nightstand, a trick of the eye, wafer of proof that I had been passed through by the beast you call yourself, the camel straddled by the leather dream of your brain. Why is this poem turning to you? Because rape does that to us. In the fitful sleep of sickness, a breaking fever, it comes to press its forehead to the cooling cloth. Every night with you was like this. I had all these children in me. I carried each one to the bed you named Second Coming, built after she left, when you had only unfinished wood and time. But you doubted yourself. You broke it. You built it again. And each time you told the story, there was a different dismantling, a loss of some vital part in the reassembly. First, it was tenderness. Then I couldn't speak without permission. Then you stopped asking and I couldn't move at all. You never wondered why there was no water. The curd of spit on my belly was an afterthought, loosed from your throat as if I'd always been this barren tract of ground you were passing. And this isn't an indictment, my love. I keep turning over the same few grains of sand, comparing memory to definition. Say, I loved the ungulate of you. Say, every night I led each innocence to your bed. Say, you kicked them beneath me like pillows. Say, you shredded them with your cleft hooves as I came. If so, who gets to choose the difference between all those nights and this? I read through all the doctor's reports. I ask too many questions before letting them enter me. I've already been promised salvation in the guise of implied consent, a bound wrist. Some days, while leaning into the oven or into the bowl, I feel powerful enough to translate each ache into inquiry. One specialist notes the tortuosity of my insides, how I take each thing I consume on a crooked path through the length of a twisted course before it leaves me. Um, and there's a series of poems in this section that are titled "My Rapist," and then fill in the blank. My rapist does fill in the blank. They're based on a poem by one of my close friends and a really wonderful poet named Tafisha Edwards, who wrote a poem called "Your Rapist is on Paid Administrative Leave." Was inspired by the story of Daniel Holtzclaw, who was a police officer in Oklahoma who was a serial rapist and raped many women, mostly women of color. And I was really struck by the idea of a poem that sort of talks about rapists being very dated, having, everyday people and like doing everyday things while also doing these monstrous things to other people. And so that's the inspiration for these poems. And I'll read one of them from this section. It's called "My Rapist Taught Me the Proper Way to Cook Bacon." Because his father would rave over skillet blackened strips and he wouldn't be his father. Not then, not now. That hulk of a man with his slowly deflating chest, rummaging for knives the new wife has hidden, hoping to remember how to slice an apple, hoping to remember how to chew it. "You are my knife," my rapist would whisper to my breasts, to the pillow over my head, and I was stupid enough to believe I'd split him open, cure him with sugar, suck salt from the fat, teach him to love women the way he taught me to bake flesh, like an afterthought, like a modest proposal. But like I said, he didn't want to be his father, so I couldn't be his mother, patient as she was with her pocketbook loans and her grandbaby running circles in the makeshift castle of her living room, while my rapist and I smeared fluids on each other a few streets away. He built that place as a teenager, he said, after the father left, so the girl had a right to be there whenever she wanted. Daycare was expensive and he was saving for a bigger place, for us. I was trained to hear home and he knew it until the first morning above freezing when the lights flickered off and a man scurried back to his service vehicle as we watched from the kitchen window, the coil of rooms cooling around us. He and I poured pancake batter into Tupperware bowls, then slammed through his mother's kitchen, still careening with the joy of surviving the glassy streets. Buoyed by hot water and warmth, we giggled and sipped his mother's homemade punch until it reddened our tongues, our teeth. Even now, I'm afraid he'll think I betrayed him as he reads this, little boy that he was, always so tired of being ruled by women, the baby and the mama, the baker, the banker. I believed when he said judges always take women's words over his. What a fucking honor. I can hear him fuming, flipping these pages back and forth, looking for his name. He would tell you there was joy in the beginning, but we humans with our windowless ranges, how could I have known the cast of iron in him would scorch anything left unattended? Truth is, I never ate so well before or since. Take that any way you want. Every morning, when I'd twist the knob, slide in the meat, I knew what I was doing. I could have sworn I knew what I was waiting for. I don't think I've ever read this one before, but I'll read My Rapist Explained. Even the water company gets a bill. And I don't know whether it's true, but I'd like to believe it, that somewhere he's lying under a new woman and a memory is unhooking from his brain and traveling loose in his body like a clot, like the small white knot of debris we watched spinning in a clarifier while touring the plant. Probably something nasty, he said, like a tampon. Had to be small enough to clear the first filter. We get a lot of those. Water comes from the river, the sewer goes into the river, and there are homeless people camping near the river. He had an answer for everything he didn't want to touch and better answers for the things he did. I hope that woman is straddling him like an overpass in winter and he's learning that concrete can't keep you warm. Or maybe her body is the nightstick she jabs into his belly while she's dumpstering his shit, making room for the gentry. He's busier now, with all these new condominiums and their waterfalls chlorinating the lobbies, the new fire hydrants and drunk drivers, the new disasters. I know he likes this concept of himself, essential and brave for being the ghost in the machine of a city that in a different century bought men who looked like him to build sewer lines and protect forts without blankets or latrines. For every narrative, there's a series of underground pipes and someone willing to pay to have them cleaned. I know what it costs to lay a crime at a Black man's feet. But whenever I turn on the faucet, I'm reminded whose hands first touched the water before it traveled into my macaroni noodles or into my hair. Every night, I turn onto my stomach in the bath and I think of it as a ritual of refusal. Years after what happened, something lassoed my breath and dragged it back into me like a runaway bride kicking her way over the threshold. But her return meant I felt everything intensely, the way water surges through the tap after a freeze or a disconnection. Like how one morning at my new address, the box is still bruising the cheap carpet, the walls went silent for no reason. When I flushed, the room was as quiet as an absconded hive. I never realized how the low hum of a phantom current penetrates everything until someone plunges a key below street level, twists a valve into submission. Minutes later, when the tank started filling again, I thought, wrong house? Maybe someone close by forgot to mail a check, or perhaps so many months behind in payment, they were letting it be what it was. I wondered about each neighbor, then my rapist. Then I thought, maybe I should just take care of myself and stop filling in all these finer details for the collection agents who are always trying to calculate how much he will pay and on whose schedule, almost as if they're the ones he really owes. I read one more poem and then we can talk. I'm going to shift to some joy if I can. I love reading this poem and people seem to like it, so I'll share it with you. It's called Love Poem That Ends at Popeyes. It's Valentine's Day and I hear tires on the slick streets. It is raining, a slow, steady rain, the kind that makes me saddest because it seems endless. And even after, the sky, having forgotten its big-eyed blue, stands aloof now, distant, while the sun, mumbling from her side of the bed, settles herself into a light doze. I am thinking of the meal I won't have to brave those streets clamp-thighed in a passenger seat to eat, or the flowers I will not have to accept awkwardly because flowers are such strange gifts. Why undress the ground just to prove I'm special? We could go to the botanical gardens, hold hands, smell the smells that come at me all at once in a sneeze, or we could pull over on the highway, run through fields of bonnets so buckled with sky they look bruised. Why has no one ever loved me the way a bonnet might engorge itself with blue? So much it is a new color, unnameable, breathless. My loves hold their breaths, calculating. They want me to look at the food and the flowers and the tiny golden heart run through with a golden thread and say, thank you. Yes, I am wearing silver, but now I will wear only gold. And then they expect me to lie down quickly as if we're children and the fields are bloated with green and it is May. Somewhere, the man who doesn't love me, though I wish I could say the same, is pacing a supermarket floor. His body a reflection in the waxed tile. Really, he is two men, one flesh man, one floor man, and both are moving in a direction away from me. They are picking out fistfuls of roses, or maybe tulips, or maybe assorted flowers with daffodils, and he knows the woman he really loves will dip her nose into them like a doe and say, thank you, and she will kiss him with her tacky lips, and for the first time, I am not angry that he might lay her down and ask if he can do the things he will do. Of course she will say yes. That's what you say when you love someone, right? That's what I would say. And this time, not because I've learned what happens when you say no or when you say nothing at all. I am not sad about whatever she will let him do or what she will do to him to make him smile, make his mouth form and his breath catch the emptiness where a few of his teeth used to be and make it ache. It's a good ache when something is missing and people still love you. I want him to be satisfied. I want him to be happy. Also, I want to be happy. We can do that separately, or we can do it together. We can do it now, or we can do it later. I am a hopeless romantic. I still make wishes before I blow out candles. And last week, I asked an oracle when, not if, I'd find true love. It said, bad reception, try again, girl. And I am trying. I am lying in bed with my arms around myself, thinking of what I will eat when I get hungry. I am willing to wait for what I want. Like when I pull up to the window and the cashier says it'll take 10 minutes for the spicy dark. And I say, yeah, that's okay. I still want it. And I pull my car over and I play my music and I imagine the fried flecks of flour smothering in the saliva of my mouth, and oh, the biscuits, and oh, the honey, and oh, the red beans in their salty velvet. And I think, this is my own gold. It is not daffodil gold. It is not supermarket roses gold. It is not a thin stringed gold attached to a locket of expectations with my face clasped between two composite hearts. But it is good and it's filling and it is enough. Thank you. Thank you so much. All right, so maybe a little bit of discussion. I'm open. You can ask me questions. You can do whatever you like.
Sure. So I was going to ask, in terms of this book, how did you find the process of writing through painful events?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if there's a process so much as there's sort of like a grappling through these things. I will say that in terms of my own experience, it came very organically. So even in terms of the book itself, like this book actually started because I was trying to finish another book. I got my MFA in 2009 and I had picked at that thesis for 7 or 8 years, trying to turn it into a book. And so April 2017, I decided that I was going to do the 30-30 challenge for National Poetry Month, where you write 30 poems in 30 days. And I was like, okay, if I write 30 poems in 30 days, I'll have enough material to finish this thesis, which had always felt undone and which I'd always sort of left and come back to, and kind of, I wanted it to be done and I wanted to put it out. So I started writing and I finished the 30-30. And then a few months later, actually right after I left Callaloo, where I met Jamelia, I went to a residency right outside Chicago and I started looking at the 30-30 poems. And I was like, oh crap, I think this is a different manuscript. I think it's doing different things. And I hadn't written any of the poems about sexual assault, none of that. I think I'd written some of the kind of complicated friendship poems. I'd written some of the poems about racism, which are earlier in the book. But once I realized that it was a different collection and it was doing different things, I just started thinking about what then does this manuscript need now that it is its own thing? And so I was at that residency for about a month, and I started writing some of the poems there. I'm trying to think. I believe it wasn't until very late in the process that I included the section about sexual violence. I think it might not have been until the fall of 2018. I spent Thanksgiving by myself, by choice. I wanted to just sit in my house and eat foods that I liked and that agreed with me. So I have some digestive issues. And so I was making deviled eggs, which is one of my favorite things. And I make them with candied bacon. And so I was cooking the bacon in the oven, and it triggered a memory. And I just kind of ran into my office and like sat down and like typed up my rapist teaches me the proper way to cook bacon, and burned the bacon in the process because it took like an hour to finish the poem. But like, I was like, oh, this is really interesting. I didn't think I would write a poem specifically about the experience. I'd kind of been tiptoeing around it in other pieces. And then the next day, which was, I think that was the day before Thanksgiving. So then on Thanksgiving, I wrote the poem about the water bill. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I think that these are strong. I think that they're speaking to the other poems in the collection. And so I put them in. When the book was picked up, I had a really great editor named Matthew Dickman, and we had a conversation a few months after the book got picked up. And so the only poems that were sort of explicitly about the experience were the two poems I just mentioned. And they were in a section, and he said very, very gently, but I think very astutely, he said, I don't think that sequence is done. And it was like divine timing, because 2 days before I had gone to eat lunch with one of my friends, and I saw the person about whom these poems were written. And I had written like a very bad draft of another poem in that sequence. And so then over the course of about a month, those two poems, I finished those two poems, and then they became included in the book. And it was really like a final puzzle piece kind of dropping into the book. I'd been writing around this subject, and there are other poems that mention the experience. The poem Scope, which is the first poem I read, was already in the book, and it sort of alludes to the experience, but not explicitly discussing like some of the aspects of that relationship and how it disintegrated. That sequence of poems that ultimately became part of that middle section really sort of came very organically. But once they arrived, I was like, yes, like this is exactly what this book needs in order to feel finished. And I think that those were the last poems I wrote for the book. So I'd say all that to say that it's really, I think it should be an organic experience. I don't think that one should ever write about trauma against one's will. I am years removed from the experience, and it's still very hard to, it's scary to read those poems. Sometimes it's scary to talk about them, but I feel emotionally well enough to do it. And I think that that is a thing that one should be thinking about, maybe not in the drafting process. I mean, you write what you want, it doesn't ever have to see the light of day. But when you're thinking about putting things out in the world, I think it's really important to be well. And writing itself is not therapy. It doesn't make you well enough to share that work. I think it can be a part of the process. But there are other things that I feel really have to be involved. The life I live now is one where I feel really supported, not only by a really good therapist, but my friends, some of whom are survivors, my family, my mom specifically, whom I love very much. The work that I do in those relationships and the work that those people do in supporting me, like, makes this kind of work possible. It's not just in the writing itself. I really had to build a life around me that could support me enough while I was writing about and discussing these things. And even still, it's very hard. I recently published a really personal essay in the Paris Review called Be Good. and it talks explicitly about my experience with the person who assaulted me. And like, I'd written the essay almost a year and a half before it came out. And even still, like, it's coming out was a really difficult thing. It wasn't insurmountable, but I was relieved that it happened when it happened, because if it had happened any earlier, I don't know that I would have been emotionally equipped enough to handle it. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
no, it does. It does. I like the fact that it came organically out of you, so almost like your body was ready to write about it. Because I think a lot of times we know there are poems we need to write that don't come when we want to write them. So yeah, the fact that it came on its own, I think, is important. There was a question actually from someone in the group who asked, like, what are the pros and cons of doing an MFA?
Okay, so I will tell you that this answer is tempered by the fact that I got my MFA 11 years ago. It was 2009. I was very young. I was a baby poet. I think the pros are as follows. You know, I was introduced to so many contemporary Black writers in my MFA. Specifically, I think of a workshop I took with a poet named Rick Hillis. And in that class, we read Natasha Trethway's Native Guard. We read A. Van Jordan's Magnolia. We read Tracy K. Smith's Duende. We read Lucille Clifton. We read Gwendolyn Brooks, but we also read writers that were writing in the moment. And that was rare for me, even though I had gone, you know, I got my undergrad degree from an HBCU, and we read tons of Black poetry, but it was, you know, it was traditional Black poetry. It was the poetry of the Harlem. I took a class on the Harlem Renaissance. I still took a class on Shakespeare. I took, you know, like, I took traditional courses, but also courses on Black literature. But it really wasn't until my graduate MFA program that I started to read poets who were writing at the same time I was writing, and who were writing about things that were intensely important to me. So, so that was one of the pros for me. I learned the very first workshop I took as an MFA student was a forms class. And I learned form. And I think, you know, I think the verdict's still out on whether or not this is a good or bad thing, but it really sort of set for me what feels like a comfortable line for me in this moment, which is roughly iambic pentameter. And so, you know, like, I appreciate that it sort of gave me the tools to sort of build my own aesthetic. Yeah, I think that I'll say that those were the two big things. Cons of the MFA, I don't know if they're cons so much as I would call them warnings. You know, getting an MFA does not make you a poet. The years that I spent after getting my MFA reading and writing and going to therapy and becoming a healthier person emotionally were instrumental in my becoming the writer I am today. Like, like you said, Jamelia, there were poems that I was trying to write that weren't ready to come out because I wasn't ready. And I didn't understand that at the time. I just thought that it meant I just wasn't supposed to write about those things. I distinctly remember being in a workshop and writing this really vague poem about having an autoimmune disease. And the poet, Chris Abani, was like, "Do you want to tell us what this poem is about?" And I was like, "Nope." And he was like, "All right, well, we're going to edit it as best, you know, we're going to give you feedback as best we can." And that was the kind of work I was doing. And it really took time away from my MFA to be more honest in my work and to be more willing to say the thing. I think I think that on the one hand, like I said earlier, you have to be ready to talk about the thing, but when you're ready, you have to sort of tell it like it is. One of my friends repeated a question that she heard in a workshop, which was, I think it's a question from Gwendolyn Brooks. And the question is, what are you pretending you don't know? And I think that you have to be well enough to be able to answer that question, but also have developed a certain skill set that allows you to to write a thing and then craft it. And some of that happened in the MFA program, but a lot of it actually happened after, because I was reading, I was still reading poetry. I was still going to poetry events. My friends were writers. We were talking about writing. We were talking about poetry. And those kinds of experiences for me are just as instrumental as what I learned to do in the MFA. So I'll say, I had a bunch of degrees, and I got them because I wanted them. And that's what I often tell people is like, if it is a thing you want to do, do it. Please do not do it as some like attempt at like validation or some belief that it's sort of going to like transform you into a writer with the, you know, big W writer. I don't think it does any of that. I think that it is just part of, for me, it's become part of my journey as a poet. It was one stop on the journey. There were other stops. There were other places where I learned important things. And so it should be a part of a larger picture. I don't know that it should be a destination so much as it's a stop on the journey.
Awesome, thank you. Shaniqua wrote in the chat, do you have any tips on keeping poems fresh and different when writing about the same subject?
Yeah, so I will say, actually, so one of the tips that I think is really important is journaling, because every day you have new experiences, you're thinking about new things. And I think for me, in the process of journaling, it helps me like sort of like dig through the trash, so to speak. Like sort of like dig through all the stuff in my head. And like sometimes I'll get down to like a really provocative image or a really interesting idea. And I'm like, oh, okay, I want to follow that. So I think that for me is really helpful. I am not a person who writes every single day. And I am not a person who like, I have friends who do that and I really admire them for it. And I think if it works for you, like do it. But I don't write for publication every day, but I do try to journal every day. And so journaling is kind of like my sketch pad. It's like the place where I get to map out things. The things that happened to me the day before sort of come to me and I'll sort of map them out, and, interesting things develop from there. The other thing I'll say is that I like on my phone, my notes app, if I come up with an interesting line or something, I write it down. My rule is if it comes to me, I write it down. I don't care how stupid it might sound, how uninteresting. If a line or an image or a phrase like tugs at me, I follow the tug. I think that tug is divine. And so if I am being obedient to it, it's going to lead me somewhere. And so, I think that in general, like those would be my tips. Let's see. So, but I think there might be an interesting way. I like exercises, and actually I'll go ahead and offer one. Jamelia, do you want to give the participants like because I was thinking of like a free write.
Yeah, I think that would be great.
Okay, cool. Yeah, let's do that. So one of the, hold on, do I have screen sharing capabilities? If not, that's okay, but let me see.
I think I've given them to you now.
Okay, cool. Let's see. So, all right, so okay, I might not need to share my screen. So one of them, I think, okay, so I'll talk about the Popeyes poem, and maybe segue into a brief exercise. So it's a little background about that poem. It was Valentine's Day. It sucked. I was in my feelings. I was also very sick. And like I started getting sick around the summer of 2017. I was taking medicines for, I have an autoimmune disease. I was taking medicines for them. And one of the medicines just like unleashed a horrible eczema flare. Like I lost my hair, I lost my fingernails, I lost my toenails, my hands would erupt in these like pustules. And also they would ache and it would make it hard to open things. So I felt it was the worst Valentine's Day ever. And I started writing that poem, and it was about me, but it was also about someone I really cared a lot about, who I just don't think shared the same sentiments. And so I was trying to write about that in a way that offered both of us grace. Um, and so that was the inspiration for the line, like, it's a good ache when something is missing and people still love you. Like, I feel like that in itself is like one of the lines in the poem where I am talking about both of us. I am talking about a specific thing, a specific thing in the friend's life, but also talking about myself and particularly my skin. Like at the time, my skin was literally missing because it was peeling off, but also as a woman with albinism, like thinking about not having melanin, like not having pigment and still being loved. And so I'll offer you this exercise. Let's take about 5 minutes to write we'll do it in epistolary form. So take 5 minutes and write a letter to yourself, and if you choose, to a beloved, about things that may be missing in both of you, but that are still, but that in spite of, and maybe even because of, like, make you lovable, like make you, that don't disqualify you from tenderness or from grace or from the possibility of love. So want to do that for 5 minutes? Was that clear?
Yeah.
Could you repeat it, please?
Yeah, sure. So write a brief letter to yourself, or or to a beloved, about something that's missing from both of your lives, but that still, but that doesn't make you unlovable. That still makes you a candidate for grace and tenderness and love and all of the good things. Does that work?
Thank you.
Okay, cool. All right, all right, I'll give you 5 minutes. I'm gonna dip really quickly and grab a book because I might read a poem from one of my friends. But I'll be right back, I promise. Okay, how are we? Does anyone need more time? I'm totally okay with that if necessary. Okay. See a couple of people still writing. Uh, so I will open the floor for the following. I understand that exercise might have unleashed some really personal stuff. You ain't got to read it if you don't want to. What I'm actually more interested in is maybe something interesting that came up as you were writing. It can be a thing that happened on the page, or it can just be a thing you thought about, like an idea for something, an interesting memory, any of that stuff. But again, totally voluntary. You do not have to share if you don't want to, but you're free to do so.
I'll share before I have to leave. I was writing about, because I've been talking a lot about how broken I am and the pieces of my heart that are missing. And I wrote a bit about that, but even those pieces are missing, I'm still lovable because I give so much love despite my heart kind of being off balance. And I know that it's interesting. I know pieces are buried with my buried family members, so I know I'm gonna get that back, but that's okay. And just see how my heart comes through my smile, which everyone seems to love, and which is what makes me really lovable.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, I love that. Goodness. And I think about that often, that like, I remember saying to someone else, like, I want to give the world more than what was given to me. Like, even those things that broke me or tried to break me, like I work hard to shine through that stuff. So I love that. Thank you. Anyone else?
I think Nala had said she wanted to share. You have to unmute yourself, Nala.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Like I said, I wrote this last night, actually. And it's funny that you wanted something similar. It's a bit different. So it says, I long for a word of kindness to set my spirit free from all the atrocities that you dumped on me. Don't get me wrong. I do not beg. I do not await. You can never erase your poison. Is it your greed or is it your jealousy stripping you of mercy? Yes, I am compassionate, not only to humanity. You see, my love goes beyond your comprehension. I see pain when you are blinded by vain. I feel injustice when you pursue unkindness. In a nutshell, you just failed. That's it.
That last line, I love it. Oh my
Thank
goodness.
you.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank
Thanks. You're welcome.
you. Others, we can do ideas, you can read anything you want.
Yeah, go Carlos, I saw your hand up.
I'm sorry, say it again.
Hi.
Carlos.
Hi.
Yeah, I find it really difficult to write love poems. So I'm really grateful for this little exercise, and
Yay.
I want to write a series of love poems to people close to me that I love. So I wrote like a little letter about this. Dear Rahim, I couldn't cut the sun deep enough to find your arm on my hip, swaying me like a free pendulum to Prince Royce La Carretera. It was your birthday, the last party we had. There was no rain except for the gentle fall we gave to our friends who watched as we danced in the low glow of your living room. I must always read the changing text on your arms before I say I love you. And that's all I have.
I love that. Thank you for sharing.
Thank
you. Beautiful. I love the idea of a project of love poems. Like, that makes, oh gosh, my heart is like pattering. I'm like, yes, I want to read those poems. Um, anyone else?
So I'm not going to read what I wrote, but it wasn't what I expected to write. I was writing about losing my hair at 15 and the process of feeling unworthy of love because that I had this like unescapable balding, and really feeling like no one would want to be in love with me because of it. And I also recognized how much vulnerability there is in being exposed in like your scalp area, and the tenderness that can come from someone loving you with it. So yeah, that's kind of what I was writing about.
Oh my goodness! Wow, that's heavy stuff. But yeah, I want to read those poems too, or whatever you make. I would love to read that. I feel you, so I'm interested. Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome. There was also a question in the YouTube chat about the spacing in your Popeyes poem.
Say it again about my spacing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
The white space.
Yeah.
Just questions around why it's spaced like that.
Yeah, so good grief. I'm trying to remember. I might have written and I don't know if you can. I'll hold it up for folks for folks who haven't seen the space in that poem. I don't know if you can see it, but like so kind of lots of spacing. I believe I wrote this poem originally on my phone. Because I was literally like lying in bed, like curled into a ball, like feeling my feelings and typing in my phone. And I think, yeah, I did do that actually, because I think that the first iteration of this poem was like a prose block. And I took it to workshop, and one of the workshoppers said, "Oh, this poem is too long. I don't think that someone's gonna publish it." And I'll just tell you, I don't believe in cutting poems for the sake of publication. I feel like when I am finalizing a draft, like those are not things for me that come to mind. Like my highest priority is this poem effective? Is it doing the things it is supposed to do? Is it saying the things that it needs to say? So I did not necessarily heed that advice, but what I did do was break it up. But I also think that the other motivation for the white space here is that this poem really is thematically it's really fragmented, because there's sort of the first part about like, you know, being happy about not having to go out. There's the second part about the complicated relationship. In the middle of that, there is an allusion to sexual violence. And then there's the section about sort of like hope and like saying like, you know, I am still trying, you know, I liken this experience to like waiting on my food order, you know, and like thinking about what's going to happen and being excited about the prospects of what's possible. And so I think that the spaces for me also like speak to that thematic fragmentation. But it's all, I think for me too, it was also one of those poems where I think what I wanted was for the eye to kind of pause on the page, because it is sort of a really halting conversation. Like it's trying to tackle a lot of things at once, and a lot of those things are deeply personal. And so I wanted there to be, I don't read it with the breaks. I've tried to read it with the breaks before, but I don't love it that way. But in the intimate space of the reader and the page, I did want there to be like, I wanted there to be, a pacing that's kind of slowed down, that like slows down the eye and sort of forces you to look at a phrase or a word, and kind of sit on it, at least, even if it's just for like one extra beat. to kind of sit there for a second before moving on. Because I think for me, that's kind of what it felt like, is sort of like this series of like really halting confessionals. So.
Thank you. Did anyone else want to share? Sorry. Yeah, guys are.
I found it quite hard, so I just, when I managed to start writing, it was quite short. You need more in your life. You need to fight more, cherish more, protect what you have. Don't let it drift, don't let it drift apart like everything has done before. That the light that the star emits is still living, that inhaling all the distance you see, that inhaling all the distance, you will see the body suspended in gravity, a pulse louder than your doubts. We can do this, we can just be. That's what I've got so far. Sorry.
It's beautiful. I love the line about the pulse being louder than your doubt. It's striking. Yeah. Thanks to all of you who read. That is so beautiful. And if your writing turns into things you want to share, please, I want to read it. Send it to me, post it on social media. I want to read what you make. So I think it's hard to think about love like right now. But I believe that like love sustains me, and like even when I'm writing about the difficult aspects of it, there's a kind of sustenance coming from that. Like I think of what I have survived and what I might be asked to survive. And I think that for me, those are really important things to think about right now in this moment when everything in the world feels so unpredictable and like unmanageable. I think I try to keep a catalog of things that bring me joy, but also things that remind me of who I am, which is why I love that line about the pulse, right? It's sort of like, it's me or my fear, and I'm louder and I have more power. So yeah, love that. All right, what shall we do next? I mean, I can read. We've got about a half hour left, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can read. We can do more exercises. We can just talk about stuff. I'm open.
Carlos, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just have a kind of question, sort of like a statement as well. It's I have a lot of difficulty writing love poems, and it comes from, I think, this anxiety about like, I mean, love is a very like weighted word, and from my experience of learning how to love someone, which has been like learning how to follow through with love, and that being whether it's like, yeah, through care, some kind of gesture and action, and the love poem itself is a gesture, isn't it? And there's still work put into it, which I want to hold and acknowledge, and yeah, I guess what I find difficult is, or I guess what my question is, how do you love someone with a poem? How do you how do you do that? It's that, yeah, that's kind of what's bugging me right now.
How do you love someone with a poem? Wow, what a question! Goodness. Well, I think the first thing that comes to mind is honesty. It's hard because there are poems I've written about people that I I read them and I think like, oh my gosh, you know, this person is so like in the case of like the tortured love poem, but like where, you know, the person perhaps doesn't know the extent of my feelings, I am always really frightened that I'm like, oh my gosh, they're gonna know, like they're gonna know exactly how I feel. I don't think that fear should prevent you from saying the thing, you know? But I also often feel like I've written those kinds of poems and I see them one way as sort of like these really rich explorations of affection and care, and the other person reads it and is like, oh my God, you know, this poem makes me sound like a horrible person. And I don't know if there's any way to remedy that. I really do believe that if I sit down to write and I am I am truthful, not only about the love itself, but I mean, not only about like the sort of wonderful aspects of the love, right? But also about its flaws, you know, like I think of something one of my mentors, Danica Kelly, who's also a poet, said in a talk recently. She said, you know, I like to treat people the way I would like to be treated. And when I think about that in terms of writing love poems, I want you to be honest with me. I want to know how you feel. I want to know what you know, you know? And so I think that is my way of loving people. But I also say that sometimes that truth is accepted in different ways. The way that I try to remedy that is with a deep understanding of the fact that like, I don't write poems to harm people. You know, even when I am writing about sexual violence, like there are one of my friends was reading through negotiations and he said, you know, it's interesting because in some of those poems you refer to that person as my love. And I'm like, yes, because because you know, sexual violence inside an intimate relationship is complicated, you know, and so that is also true. Like the violence is the truth, but also the love is the truth. And so, you know, I think that that's the thing that I try to hold on to, because if I think too much about how it might be received by the other person, I feel like I might not actually tell the truth, and the truth is the love. So, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that's the way I try to think about that in terms of like loving someone while I'm writing. I think it's an absolutely important question to be asking yourself, who am I loving when I'm writing these poems? I personally believe that one of those people should always be yourself. But again, you know, loving yourself means being honest about your own complicity. And I think that's a thing that I really worked hard to do in this book, is to talk about the ways in which I have been, you know, unknowingly complicit in you know, toxic masculine violence. And that doesn't mean that I am at fault for crimes committed against me. What it means is that, you know, I need to continue doing the work of untangling myself from that, as well as doing the work of healing. So
yeah. It makes me think as well of like, yeah, the dangers of like with writing the love poem of pedestaling someone as well. And you know, if you're really going to love someone, like honesty of course is key, and that sometimes means telling the harsh truth. I think that helps. Thank you. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Yeah, it is. I mean, it's telling the truth about everybody in the room, you know, tell the truth about everybody. I think that was one of the things that was what I had to learn to do between the MFA and now, is learning how to tell the truth. And that's not to say they weren't trying to teach me. I just might not have been listening. It might have taken, I'm pretty hard-headed. It might have taken me some time to get there, but yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
Thank you.
No, my pleasure. Other questions, discussions? Hold on, let me look at the chat. Okay, yeah. All right, cool. Okay, so I am going to, let me flip. By request, I'm gonna do an exercise. So let's see, my screen sharing. I have a really actually this might tie in really well with our conversation. So I have a friend named Keith S. Wilson who published a book of poems in 2019 called Field Notes on Ordinary Love. And one of my absolute all-time favorite poems, yeah, one of my absolute all-time favorite poems in this book is a poem called A Short List of Grievances. Can you see it? I just shared my screen. Can everyone see it?
Yeah.
You got it? Okay, cool,
Yeah.
cool, cool. I'm gonna read it aloud and then I'm gonna give you an exercise. This is called A Short List of Grievances. First, you are invisible, which is another word for Jesus, she's gone. Second, the medulla oblongata makes you automatic. So even when I am not thinking of your hips, I am thinking of your hips. The dreams I have dreamed of being loosed like a sparrow would pronounce themselves into wilder dreams if I were a bird already. I would have to eat nothing until I was thin as the air and I'd baffle the moon. My simple machines turning the sky like a mobile. I could be ready, heave and release, only the nothing of a bird. Third, you are right. I am cabinetry. I am a man that needs to know conclusively that he's empty. Your name, you know, is a midnight call. I am talking too much about air and hardly about breath. What do you think, really, makes me lift my chest? This should be simple, but never is. Consider the wing, to whom the burden of air becomes the burden of flight. So I would like you to take 5 to 7 minutes to write a short list of grievances to your beloved. I'm going to take this, stop the screen share. And that's it. That's the exercise. You can be as innovative as you want. You can do a listicle, you can do a letter, you can do bullet points, you can do all whatever works. Okay, so I think I'm at the 7-minute mark, but does anyone do you need more time? A couple more seconds? Looks like people are finished up. So you're absolutely welcome to share. The same rules apply. You ain't got to share if you don't want to, or you can just talk about the process if you want, something interesting that came up.
I'll go.
Yeah.
It's a bullet point list, I guess. You move slow in the shower as if you are romancing water or slow dancing to the sound of it hitting the tiles. You always cook too much rice as if you are expecting visitors. Once you kissed me and I forgot how to feel the ground. When you talk to God, you use your inside voice, the one only your heart can hear. You used my body to create children that choose you over me. I question how the duvet always favors your side of the bed and why my feet are always cold.
Good
Yeah.
grief. Oh my gosh, that's beautiful. Oh, and the line about the children. Oh my gosh. I love that. That's amazing.
Thank you.
And the water, the line about the water, romancing water. Yes.
It just takes ages. It's forever.
I am also that person. I'll be in the shower, like thinking about something. I was like, oh wait, I'm supposed to be scrubbing. Love that. Love that. Anyone else? Let's see. Oh, did I see a hand?
Yeah, if you want to share, just unmute and go for it.
Yeah.
I'll share something that is not exactly completed.
Okay.
Yeah.
All good.
When you forgo the arsenal of language at your disposal and respond with grunts, a silence that works overtime, digging a chasm between us, what is your intention? To bury me in a well of wrongs that I am yet to discover about myself? That was where we ended.
Love it. Love it. Yeah. Anyone else?
There's a couple on YouTube that I'll read. John wrote, my love returned in the mail. Technology for now, my love is returned in the email. Your warm hands that massage me and hide your cold heart. My inability to see people as they are not as they appear. And then we had another one from Markson57 who wrote, you'd look good on wood. I would too. I would. You never say could to me, but you should. I too want sainthood. You misunderstood.
Wonderful. Oh gosh. That like compounding rhyme. I love that. Love that. Yeah. Wonderful. Anyone else? We've got about 8 minutes left. So we can certainly share more work. We can, I'm open to more questions. If there are questions on YouTube, if there are questions that folks in the Zoom call have, I can do that. I can read another poem. I'm open.
I have a quick short one.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. So I only came up with one in the list. I found it quite difficult. A London sky view, or the sky burning open. Some sunsets forget to finish their love letters. What a task it must be to facilitate the movement of mistaken gods.
Beautiful. Yes, absolutely. I love the idea of the sunset forgetting to finish its love letter. Yes. Exquisite. Yeah. Anyone else?
There's a question on YouTube. Yoma says, I'm a 16-year-old aspiring poet. Any tips?
Any tips? Write as much as you can whenever the urge strikes you. I think that's what I appreciate. I appreciate having my iPhone. I appreciate right now, like having the time and space to do that, being sheltering in place. Take advantage of the luxury of time. But also, yes, take advantage of the luxury of time on multiple levels, right? So that means writing when the mood strikes you and you are able to do so. But it also means understanding that time is your friend, like time is a gift, and you do not have to sort of work to peak at 18 or 28 or 35. I think it's really important to not rush the process. Put yourself out there. Absolutely. Write what you feel compelled to write, submit what you feel compelled to submit, share what you feel compelled to share. I think it's really important to find communities of writers who support you in your work and who you can trust. In the past couple of years, I have come to really appreciate having friends who are not only friends to me, but who are friends to my work. I don't know that that's a thing I ever knew I needed, but it is so vital. I recently started writing fiction, and I have a really close friend who's a fiction writer named her name is Claire Jimenez. Oh, actually, sorry. Speaking of friends and shameless plugs, I'll put this in the chat. There's the link to Keith's book. If you love that poem and you want to read more poems like that, and I'm also gonna find the link to Claire's book. Because they're my friends, but they're excellent writers. It's been really important to me to find friends who are friends to your work. And as much as this is, an artistic endeavor, and it is sort of one of those like lofty professions, or at least that's what people tell us. Like, it's also very much not always a safe space. I would also say trust your instincts when it comes to like mentors and like people who want to get their hands on your work. Trust your instincts about who you should trust. You don't owe anyone trust. You don't necessarily owe anyone friendship. You owe them kindness, definitely, but friendship is an intimacy, and you don't necessarily want that with everybody, particularly in terms of your work, because relationships impact your writing both directly and indirectly. So I would also say that. But be open to possibility, be open to opportunities. If a thing feels right, go for it. It is important to listen to people who came before you and who, have experience and who can offer great advice. But at the end of the day, your instincts are your instincts. I will repeat what I've said before, which is I feel like instinct is divine, and it should be heeded, it should be cultivated. And anyone who is in any way trying to make you go against those instincts, I would think twice about their message, any of those things. So I guess that would be my general advice. Like, just keep writing, keep working, keep following wherever the nudge is pushing you. I started out my writing life as a poet. I wasn't necessarily interested in writing essays. I thought I might, I have a PhD in English, so I thought I might be a critical writer, which I don't think I really am. I'm not really invested in writing literary criticism, but I didn't think that I would ever write fiction, and I do. I didn't think that I would ever write personal essays, and I do. It's a journey, and you will find yourself in places that you don't necessarily expect to be, and that's not a bad thing if it feels like the right thing for you. So I think that would be the gist of my advice.
Thank you. And there's another question on YouTube. Do you think poetry, reading and writing as well are accessible for people with dementia or other groups like that?
Mm-hmm. I think so. I think I personally am not neurotypical. And I think that poetry for me has actually been it has been a way to self-express that feels safe for me. I feel like, yes, I think it can be. I think that certainly depending on what your particular needs are and what your particular disabilities are, like it certainly calls for a certain kind of modification. But I think, yeah, I mean, it is still very much open and available to anyone. It may be that you're hearing poetry instead of reading it. You know what I mean? It may be that you are memorizing sort of very short lines of poetry as opposed to Mercutio's soliloquy and Romeo and Juliet, so, but that doesn't mean that it's any less powerful for you. It doesn't mean that it can be any less life-changing. It just means that you modify the practice to fit what works for you, which I think we should all be doing, really. I think that poetry should be intensely personal, and it should be a craft that you are creating in community with others, but also very much creating on your own. I think reading is the same way. I think, it's funny because, if you go onto social media, people, at least in my feed, people are always telling me what I should read or what I need to be reading, what I need to be watching, what I need to be thinking. And I mean, it's interesting to read that stuff and to think about those things. But I think at the end of the day, you kind of have to create a life and a practice that are best suited for you. So yes, definitely possible. And possible that it can be accessible.
Perfect. Thank you. I think those are the last questions. Thank you so much, Destiny.
Yeah, thank you. It's been such a pleasure. I am often terrified of, first of all, I'm terrified of seeing my face on camera. Also,
you look gorgeous.
Oh, thank you so much. I panic when there are like long stretches of time that I have to fill with things. So 90 minutes, I was like, what am I going to spend 90 minutes on? But this has been so much fun. And I've really enjoyed hearing, y'all read. Like I'm excited. I want to read more of your work. So yeah.
Can you tell everyone where they can find you, like on Twitter and Instagram, what your handles are?
Yes, I'm on Twitter at Destiny O'Shea, and on Instagram, I think it's at Destiny Birdsong. I think if that's not right, you see that little doll in the corner? She's my avatar on Instagram. That's a gift from Jamelia. Thank you so much. I love her so much. I rub her feet for good luck sometimes. She's my girl. But yes, I'm only on those two things. And I have a website if you want to shoot me an email here and there. My inbox is sometimes a trash fire, so I might not always get to you quickly, but I do respond, and I love hearing from people. And especially if you're publishing things, let me know what you're publishing so I can read it. And yeah, so hit me up.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Enjoy your weekend.
Okay, you too. Okay.
Bye.
Bye.